Historic day. You hear words from Merkel talking about growth side by side with Samaras. Is this politicking, or is this a new phase in German-Greek relations?
I think Chancellor Merkel is in Athens to clarify the German position, which is that there will be no more official loans to Greece, and any additional capital inflows would have to come from the private sector, subject, of course, to Greece implementing the structural reforms needed to become competitive. And so I think it's not a coincidence that she's bringing with her a number of German businessmen.
Tell me this, Miranda. Is Greece making progress? Are they instigating reform? Why are they missing targets? What is going wrong with this whole program?
There have been huge delays, first with 2 electoral contests in May and in June, and then there was a lengthy period of coalition negotiations on which spending they would cut. Now they're very close to an agreement, but there have been delays and there have been slippages in the program, so the program is off track.
What's the tolerance level? You know, 6 years of recession, another 13.5 billion euros to come in terms of cuts. Just what is the outlook for Greece? How can you recover from that?
Well, certainly you cannot recover through more loans. And so I believe the government's priority to extend the program by 2 years is not the right priority. It would just add to the debt burden and contribute to uncertainty as to whether Greece will finally stay in the Eurozone or not.
And the priority should be?
It should be OSI, it should be official debt reduction. Greece's budget, the draft budget, projects the debt to GDP ratio to rise to 169% of GDP this year and 179% of GDP next year, which is way above the Troika's debt sustainability analysis back in February. So obviously the debt is not sustainable, and they should be talking about debt reduction, official debt reduction.
Well, it's interesting because the IMF executive director said last night, and this is Mino Snell, that actually European countries should consider restructuring Greek debt they hold. Really, they're in an unsustainable position. Well, there's only one big holder of Greek debt that I understand that hasn't written down their value, and that is the ECB.
That's correct. They hold, they bought around 50 billion euros worth of Greek government bonds, and they could at least pass on to Greece the benefit of the 25% discount at which they bought these bonds, instead of insisting of being paid at full face value.
Do you think that's something Draghi's talking to his cohorts about?
I believe so. That is certainly not the same treatment that the private bondholders received, where the haircut was in excess of 53.5%, and in net present value terms it was closer to 90%.
Reality and myth. Speaking of which, tax, reality and myth in Greece. Is it a myth that Greeks are avoiding tax, that they're just simply continuing not to be brought to book on tax?
It's not a myth, it's the reality, unfortunately, and very little progress, unfortunately, has been made on this front. So the burden of adjustment has not been fairly distributed so far, partly because tax evasion has not been tackled.
Would this not go to the top of the agenda then? You know, we've had a number of years now, we've had 2 programs. Surely somebody worked out that actually collecting the tax was top of the agenda. Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, the Troika of creditors has been insisting that the Greek government appoint a permanent secretary whose term is independent of the political cycle to collect the revenue.
We touched briefly there on an extension, and you say that that's not the way forward. The political chassis, for want of a better words, in Greece, it's not a strong government position that Samaras has. Would that be a fair assessment at the moment?
Well, the coalition controls 179 seats in the 300-seat parliament, so I am confident that they can get the spending cuts through Parliament, hopefully sooner rather than later, because Greece will run out of cash by the end of November.
Credibility is something, international credibility is something that brings funds back to a country. By Merkel coming today, by her, as it were, handing the olive branch of talking about growth, is this enough to send a signal to markets that Europe is serious about helping Greece?
Absolutely. I think that's part of the purpose of her trip. It's to signal her support for the Greek people and for the government's efforts to reform the economy. It's also to signal that Germany supports Greece's membership in the Eurozone and intends to keep Greece there.